Hey guys.
Oh, hey man, how's it going?
Thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks for having us.
Can't wait to see the game.
Cool.
All right, Josh, let's talk about Pillars of Eternity.
It's cool. You know basically
yeah, you
what
just
it
sold me
is.
by saying it's cool.
All right. So it's a Kickstarter-backed project. We had 77,000 awesome fans that backed our vision of making a game inspired by the Infinity Engine games.
Right.
So the Infinity Engine games, Baldur's Gate, Icewind Dale, and Planescape Torment, and the sequels to the Baldur's Gate and Icewind Dale games. And the three things that we really focus on are exploration of beautiful environments, which is a big part of those games, tactical party-based combat and a real-time with pause combat system, and having a really cool reactive story that develops over the course of the game, and companions that go with you and react to the choices that you make over the course of the game. Those were very core elements to the Infinity Engine games, to lesser or greater extents in all of them. And so those are the three things we've been focusing on.
So in this case, you wanted to recreate the feel of an Infinity Engine game, but without the baggage of Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, and I mean, in a lot of ways, Dungeons and Dragons definitely inspired a lot of the choices that we made, but we did want to make our own setting, we wanted to make our own rule system, but when a person comes into it, we want it to have the feels. So when they boot it up and they start playing, they're like, oh yeah, this, it's new rules and things like that they have to learn, but it should feel like it falls in line with what they've experienced before.
So, I mean, before we even jump into this, how do you start with that? How do you...
Well, it kind of starts about thinking about like, well,
how
what
do you
is
create a role-playing game that evokes that feeling?
Well, it's kind of we looked at things like art style, like how are the characters built and displayed in the game, what sort of materials were used to construct the graphic user interface, obviously. So, for example, having a skeuomorphic user interface, one that looks like it's made of metal and wood and stone. That's very traditional with the Infinity Engine games. Wireframe, you kind of saw in the Neverwinter games, not quite as appropriate for a game like this. So it's about making those choices to get the aesthetic feelings right. And then also look and feel, movement, like how the circles look, how it feels to select and drag, target things, just all that sort of stuff that adds up to the feeling of interacting with the game. And then when it comes to the rules and things, we just think about like, well, what are the things that people associate with these classes or these races that makes them excited about the idea of playing these characters, and then trying to reinforce that as much as possible. So in a lot of cases, we're not using the same sort of abilities that you see in D&D, but they still give the feeling of the character being that type of person, that type of warrior or wizard or whatever. So again, it really comes back to not the specifics of mimicking, but seeing like, what's the flavor of this? What's the spirit of this? How can we have that same spirit in what we do while making it our own? Okay.
Cool. Let's see some of the game.
All right, check it out. So what we're going to be looking at is the first few areas of the game. This is the intro of the game. The game is set in a new fantasy setting we're developing at Obsidian called Eora. And Eora is a big old world. The part of it that you're in right now is called the Eastern Reach. It's an area that's being heavily colonized. There are old ruins in it that a lot of people who are colonists like to explore and try to plunder. But that's very, very dangerous because the locals regard them as sacred, and they will defend them, including killing people that go into the ruins. So your character can be from a number of different backgrounds, and you're part of a caravan that's traveling into the area. And you're traveling deep into the Eastern Reach when you come across a felled tree that blocks your path as night is falling. And even though you're near these ruins, the caravan master Odama says, this tree is fallen, we're not going to get around it, we have to set up camp here, you guys just better be careful. So one of the things you might notice when you're looking at this is we intentionally looks like a very Baldur's Gate style scrolling text and narration. We use these for our chapter breaks and interstitials and stuff like that.
I assume this is telling me that I'm an orphan and I'm being raised by...
No, nothing like that. But it is talking about the caravan and how it winds into the Eastern Reach, and basically all the stuff I just said in more dramatic fashion. So character creation is once you sort of have the context for what you're going into, you can create your character. As in all the Infinity Engine games except for Planescape Torment, you can make a male or a female character. You can choose from many different races. During the Kickstarter campaign, they backed a total of 6. So you can make humans, dwarves, and elves, very traditional. We know a lot of people like their dwarves and their elves. And we also have some new races. We developed the Aumaua, who are a large aquatic or semi-aquatic race. And then the Orlans, who are small, long-eared, furry, kind of semi-feral race, but they're the replacements for gnomes and halflings. And then the godlike, are very unusual looking. That thing you see on his head is not actually a helmet. It is actually growing out of his head.
So are they like plane touched?
Yeah, they're kind of, people believe they're touched by the gods. And some people think they're cursed, some people think they're blessed. but their appearances are very unusual, and people tend to respond very strongly to how they look. We're going to stick with our bud, the human here. Each race has different sort of sub-ethnicities. They're mostly just sort of like for flavor. They can also change your appearance. So the meadow humans are sort of the Euros, and then the ocean humans are much darker skinned, and then the savanna humans are more like sort of tan, kind of like Latin American appearance to them.
Do these choices affect dialogue options? Or
Yeah, every once in a while, not so much your race and ethnicity, but your background, as you'll see later on, has more impact on that. The subrace, for humans, it's just purely aesthetic. The subrace choices for other races sometimes have other mechanical effects as well.
Okay.
And then for classes, again, in the Kickstarter campaign, we started with 5. The backers wound up backing 11. So it's very, comparable to a full like D&D game.
So what were the ones that were added because of the backers here?
So we started with fighter, rogue, priest, and wizard. I'm sorry, fighter, rogue, priest, wizard, and ranger.
Okay.
And then everything else on that list was added by them. So the paladin here was added, druids, monks. We also have 2 new classes that are not in D&D, the chanter, which is kind of conceptually similar to the bard, but plays very differently.
Okay.
And then the Cipher, and the Cipher is kind of like a psionicist.
Okay.
They use their minds to connect to the souls of other people and make magical effects happen that way.
Interesting.
And so those are 2 new classes that we
Do they
developed.
have to like focus on?
Yes. So the way that works is they use weapons, whether it's ranged weapons or melee weapons, to attack enemies and then build focus, sort of by like siphoning off soul energy from them.
Right.
And then they can use that focus to power their abilities, but their abilities always have to target someone. They can't ever target open ground. Okay. So you can do an AoE around an ally that affects the people around them. You can ricochet an attack off of an enemy into another enemy, but you can't ever just release something in open ground. Everything always has to use another person's soul as a focus for the effect.
Interesting. Okay.
We're going to go with a barbarian, which is pretty fun. The barbarians are great at doing area of effect damage. They're great at dealing with mobs. They also can do quick bursts of movement. They're wild sprint, and they're fairly tough, so they're pretty fun to play. We have 6 ability scores, or attributes as we call them. We wanted to go with a traditional spread of 6 because that's very D&D-like.
Right.
People on our forums really gravitate around 6 attributes, so we wanted to make sure the backers felt like, yep, this is falling in line with what we expect.
You were saying earlier that it was really important even to get the order of these right.
Yes.
Like, I can see like the kind of the physical stats up at the top,
Yes.
and then the more mental stats.
Yes, and actually I can see one of those is out of order. Dexterity should come after Constitution.
Oh, okay.
But that order is important. We did change the names of some of these. Part of that is because we have them mechanically do things that D&D doesn't do with the stats.
Sure.
And also because the backers, once we announced like, oh, this differs in this way, they said like, it doesn't really feel like the same thing. Why don't you name it something else? So we did reorganize those, and they do different things. But one of the important things about that reorganization and the restructuring is that we wanted to make sure that no matter what attributes you built up for a character, that there was a way you could make them useful for the character that you built. So for example, in this build, Brandon has emphasized intellect and might for his character. Might doesn't seem that weird because that makes your damage increase. Intellect normally for a barbarian is not a really great attribute. In Pillars of Eternity, intellect affects the durations of all your abilities, and it affects the area of effect of all your abilities. Because barbarians have lots of short use abilities, increasing their duration is extremely useful, so your frenzies last longer, your wild sprints last longer. And then because you do AoE damage with your carnage attacks, a higher intellect actually makes them cover a larger area.
Okay.
So we wanted to make sure that if you have an idea for a character like, I'm going to play the idiot muscle wizard, like, okay, that's cool. Like you have very short durations and small area of effect, but you do a ton of damage with your attacks.
So what we're talking about here is a barbarian who's very scholarly.
Sure.
and insightful.
Yeah, he's very, very keen intellect.
Interesting.
So it's all about allowing people to build different types of characters to differentiate themselves from other characters of the same type.
And will you include, like, because you're kind of talking about micro archetypes in that case, you know, the dumb wizard, with short durations. Will there be any sort of guidance in the game that kind of tells people they can start building characters in more unique ways than what they're thinking about in the
well, one thing that you're not seeing right here that we haven't built in yet is we're going to obviously show like what each of those attributes affect.
Sure.
But it's actually supposed to be more of just a natural thing where we don't want to necessarily say, hey, by the way, you can build these specific characters, as much as say, like, here's the system, and people can go like, oh, you know what? If I have a rogue and rogue sneak attack whenever enemies are inflicted with these status effects, and I inflict these status effects, if I can inflict status effects for longer with a high intellect, I'm going to be able to sneak attack for longer against an individual enemy before I have to reuse my abilities.
Right.
So having the player sort of think through like, you know what, if I build my character this way, I can kind of do this special thing with them.
Right.
That's the sort of thing I want to encourage.
And I imagine players start learning that as they're playing those characters, and then the characters evolve from there.
Sure, and if you just come in here and you're like, oh, I don't care what any of this stuff is, and you're just like, might,
right.
con, play, it's going to be a good barbarian. They're going to be really tough and they're going to do a ton of damage.
Sure.
But it's most of the organization is saying like, you don't have to do that if you don't want to, and you're not building a bad character by doing that.
Okay, that's great.
So moving on from that, we have the cultures that you can select from. Part of this is role playing. It also determines the starting equipment you have. So the difference between someone from Edir versus the Exomotal Plains is just the gear that they have.
Okay.
It also affects some dialogue options in the beginning of the game, and later on you can sometimes refer to the culture that you came from. But it's mostly for role-playing and just for starting gear. We're going to go with the Edir culture with this light hide armor, midriff-bearing hide armor, and the axe and sword, which is very classic barbarian.
Classy look.
Yeah, you can also pick your background. Again, this is mostly purely, actually this is purely role-playing. There's no mechanical effect from it. But sometimes it comes up in conversation. It allows you to kind of just define your character a little bit better.
Sure.
So we're going to go with slave. As in all the Infinity Engine games, you can choose your portraits. You can pick from a wide variety of them.
Are you going to be able to import portraits?
Of course. Yeah, you can always import your portraits. So whatever crazy conglomeration of fantasy artists you want to put together in your party, you can do that. A lot of people, there are a lot of talented artists out there now. Sometimes they'll make their own portraits and they'll just import them. So, and I'm sure
I always fall back to like a Larry Elmore thing.
Of course, yeah. A lot of people are going to take your Clyde Caldwells, Larry Elmores, Keith Parkinsons, bring them in. Of course, you can set your custom colors for your character because once they get down to about 1.5 inches tall, it's nice to be able to see their custom colors called out.
Sure.
And your hair and skin. You can customize your facial hair, your face, and your hair itself. So.
Is this in the Unity engine?
It is a heavily modified Unity engine. So we've made a number of changes to the renderer and obviously just to add a lot of the RPG features. But yeah, it's built on Unity, which has been pretty fun to work with.
Awesome.
And then you can select your voice set, which is, again, very useful for making sure your character is actually responding to the commands you're giving them.
Fantastic. So on the whole, the character creation feels very much like an Infinity Engine game. It's there's some nuance there, new things for experienced players to learn, but anyone who jumped in and played Baldur's Gate back in 2000 or whatever it was, like, they'll feel right at home.
Yeah, I mean, we want people to feel very comfortable jumping into it, but we want them to feel comfortable jumping into it even if they're new to these sort of games.
Sure.
So you notice, like, you do pick your class, you do pick your race, you do pick your attributes. You don't pick a ton of, if you're a wizard, you pick spells and things like that. But we wanted to make sure that at least when you're first making a character, there's not a lot of gotcha stuff where it's like, oh, I can't believe you made that choice right at character creation. Now your character's going to suck for the rest of the game. So we do believe that it has a lot of nice, cool stuff that feels like there's a lot of detail and a lot of depth in it. But it's something that if you're like, you know what, I never really played those games, I'd like to get into them, but I've never played D&D, you can still do that.
Okay.
So in the game, in the story itself, so once you start out in this caravan, Sodema says, yeah, we had to set this up because, you know, the tree got felled. We don't really have much option, but we have to wait for morning. But he says, do not wander around in this area. Like, we're really close to these ruins. The locals will kill you for going into them.
Might as well be telling me to go and do that.
Yeah, so, but he does tell you, he's like, you're looking a little sick. It looks like you have rumbling rot. I know how to make a remedy for that. I'm going to send someone to help you find the ingredients I need to make that.
Okay.
So yeah, he asks Kalisha. Kalisha is a fighter who's with the caravan. He says, why don't you go with him and help him out? So when you start out here, it's you and Kalisha. Kalisha is a fighter. You're a barbarian. They differ in that the fighter is really focused on defense. They're very good at blocking attacks. It's hard to hit them. They also regenerate stamina over the course of a fight, and they're very accurate and reliable with their attacks. Barbarians are fast and furious. They move very quickly. They can do a ton of damage to enemies in an area, but their defenses are not very good.
Right.
And so they tend to burn brightly and then fade out very quickly.
Do you find this is something that's kind of unique since the Infinity Engine games were popular, but a lot of times when game designers describe roles like this, they think about it a little bit in terms of MMOs. Like, you're talking about the fighter being defensive, and then my mind immediately goes to tank. Or the barbarian I'm thinking of as, like, you know, just kind of a glass cannon damage dealer. Is that something? Is there any way to get away from that when you're designing an RPG?
Well, I guess I guess the thing is you can either think about what the characters are good at or you can't.
Yeah.
Now, I think the thing we don't want to do is limit a person to saying, like, you're the tank, therefore you're restricted to only doing defender things,
right.
Or tank things. Or you are the support character, therefore you can only do support things. So I think it's important to say, like, this class is really good at this thing, but then saying, like, well, what else can they be good at? Or what can they be sort of good at?
Right.
Because those are other ways and directions that you can develop the character over the course of the game. So, and that's what allows your barbarian to feel different from someone else's barbarian. So you can choose to emphasize one aspect of the character or take something that's kind of way out there and try to build on it instead.
That's something I really loved about old Infinity Engine games and just kind of AD&D, right? Was that you could have a very special character, someone with like an 1892 like strength.
Yeah.
Like it's all they do is lift weights all the time. But there was room for a generalist in a lot of cases too.
Yeah, so we do want to encourage people to sort of experiment with characters and experiment with builds. And when we set out to build their, to construct their abilities and what they were good at, we said, like, well, don't just focus on the one thing that they're good at, but what are the other things that they can do that are sort of interesting and not entirely in line with whatever. So the Barbarian has things that are not entirely around, like dishing out damage, also utility, like you can sprint around very quickly, you can intimidate people and make it harder for them to move by you, stuff like that. So it's there's a lot of neat stuff that you can do with it. We didn't want them to feel we wanted them to feel thematically restricted more than role restricted. So a barbarian does things that feel like a barbarian would do: intimidate people, jump into a big mob, go crazy and drop dead. Like, that sort of stuff feels very archetypically barbarian. I think that's more important to capture than really saying, oh, mechanically this is exactly the narrow band that they can focus on.
Okay.
So, by the way, I was just going to say we're shopping with Hayden, the merchant in the camp. So even though you start with some gear based on your background and your class, you can choose to buy some additional gear. So in this case, I bought a pike and a battle axe, or rather Brandon bought a pike and a battle axe. So you can see all your characters' inventories on one screen.
Right.
You can switch their equipment by switching between the different characters.
That's a nice change.
Yeah, that's one of those ease of use things where we're like, you know what, everyone having their own individual sheet and page is not necessarily super thrilling.
Right. I'm also just looking at like things you've changed with the UI. It's very reminiscent of like Baldur's Gate, but redesigned in a very modern way.
Yeah, we wanted it to feel, again, very like chunky and like it's made out of wood and metal and stuff like that, but also just be a little more flexible and less obtrusive in a lot of ways. So we're going now to go get those springberries to fix the rumbling rot. Sparful is the guy that's smoking by the tree. He was actually sent to go get water, but he's insanely lazy, so he decides to have a smoke. So we're on our own to find the springberries. So to show a little bit of the combat here, it is a real-time with pause combat system. So right now, Kalisha is using her defender ability to try to hold a line and draw the wolves towards her. Even though she's being hit, she has a constant stamina recovery, so she can kind of weather that a little more easily. She also has her knockdown ability that she's going to try to... Ooh, she didn't knock... Oh, she got knocked down.
Uh-oh.
So wolves can knock down as well. Right now, the Barbarian is using a pike, so he's attacking from range from behind Kalisha. That helps protect him from damage. Did you blow it twice? Oh, no. Well, we took care of it anyway. Win some, you lose some. Knock down some, you don't.
It's not the prettiest win.
So we found the springberries, which we need to fix the rumbling rot. And then Kalisha, she just takes this opportunity to start to ask you about your background. So based on the choices you made in character creation, she asks you different questions about where you came from, how you came into the Eastern Reach, and why you're going to the Deerwood, which is the country that you're going into. So based on that, you have different things that come up in conversation. You can say, oh, this is why I came here, or this is why I came here. Or you can tell her to screw off, and I don't want to answer your questions.
This is where you start defining your character.
Yeah, it's kind of where you're defining like what your deal is. It's the role-playing sort of element.
Right.
And that, like I said, that comes up very rarely in conversation, but it's mostly used just for you to feel like you've defined your place in the world.
Sure.
So now that we have those berries and Kalisha has had her conversation with you to define your background, she's wondering where Sparful is because we need that water. So we're going to go try to find him. So we get on by the river and we don't find Sparful, but we do find his water skin. So we're just going to fill up the water ourselves. So what we're looking at right now is something we call scripted interactions. And it's something that we've enjoyed really bringing to the game. It's a very sort of traditional storytelling style, seen in games like Darklands and stuff like that. So it's just illustrations and text with sound effects. And in this case, as you're filling your water skin, Sparful comes wandering out of the forest. He looks like he's walking kind of unevenly. We ask if he's okay. The answer is no, I have an arrow in my back.
Well, okay.
And it turns out that Sparful got a little too close to the ruins. And so now the locals think that you are here to raid the ruins with your caravan, and they're going to try to take you out.
So good.
So let's see if you can knock down this guy. Yep, there he goes. Flat on his butt.
Is there any sort of order system when you're paused? Can you queue up multiple orders?
Oh, we don't currently have a queuing system. It's something that we would like to add. I'm not sure if it's actually going to be able to be done, but right now we haven't found a ton of need for it based on how the command system works. But usually
it's flexible enough when you
yeah,
pause.
usually when for things like that attack, like that knockdown, you'll immediately go into your default actions right after that. And also characters like wizards, they have fallback abilities, so they don't need to constantly be casting spells.
Okay.
They can actually use ranged weapons like wands and rods and stuff like that to do damage at a range. Okay. So it doesn't have any uses to it or anything. So here Kalisha is going to try to hold these two guys off, and then I'm going to use Wild Sprint, which is a barbarian ability, to very quickly dash around. So they move way faster. It's a very short duration. You can only do it twice per rest, but you can really quickly close in on a target, whether it's an archer or a spellcaster or something like that.
That's something else I've noticed here. Like it's in most Infinity Engine games, you would kind of cheese your way through by resting a lot.
Yeah, so we'll talk about resting in a bit. But so one thing I will say is you notice like in these fights, the red is filling up on the portraits.
Yeah,
that is short-term damage, and we call them that stamina right now. But we're probably going to change the name to endurance because I think it's a little more intuitive for people.
Sure.
So as you take that damage, your character can get knocked out if it gets down to the bottom, but after the fight, you get back up and all that endurance comes back.
It's temp damage.
Yeah, the green bar on the left side of the portrait, that is health. That's long-term damage. When that hits 0, your character is either maimed or killed, depending on the difficulty level.
So is that dropping after every combat? Where
yes, it does. It goes down at a slower rate than your endurance does.
Okay.
So it's
going to go a long way to
progressive.
make you a lot stouter than a level 1 AD&D character.
Yes, and it's also just to kind of pace you better so that you don't feel the need to sleep all the time.
Right.
And to make you more strategically conscious of like, oh, that guy's health is getting really low. I better play him back a little bit more. I'm going to play this guy forward. I'm going to play a little more cautiously. I'm going to have this guy use abilities instead of that guy's because that's putting him into risk and stuff like that.
Okay.
So we made it back to the camp, and now all these Glanfathans, these locals they've slaughtered most of the camp. You can see everyone lying around dead. Boo-hoo. But they have one guy left.
No sympathy for the camp, man.
I've given this demo too many times.
Okay.
Boo-hoo. Your camp's dead.
Move on.
But one of the guys is still alive, which is Head, and he's the merchant that sold you the stuff before. So the Glanfathan leader, the guy who's attacking the whole camp, he's saying, you guys better, you're trespassing, you better put down your arms or I'm going to kill this guy. So you have a lot of different ways you can try to talk your way through the situation. One thing I want to call attention to is that number 2 option, that lore option, that's dark red. You have the option of seeing dialogue choices that you don't qualify for. It doesn't actually show you what it would say, but it shows like, by the way, if you had a higher lore, if you had a higher intellect, you would get something here. You can turn that off if you don't want to see it, but it is there if you're curious about how those different choices play out.
Are choices like that, do they also have like a chance mechanic?
There's no chance mechanic, but just because something unlocked does not mean it is good.
Okay, that's
As we'll find out in a minute.
That's fair.
So, also, all the things on the right, where you see honest, minor, diplomatic, passionate, or rational, those are all personality markers. Those influence your reputation.
Okay.
So as you perform actions that are honest, or rational, or passionate, or cruel, that builds your reputation as being that sort of a person. And then over the course of the game, you build a reputation based on the choices that you make. And then people will respond to that. Some people respond positively, some people respond negatively. And the idea is, not that it's sort of like karmic wheel of justice, but that in equal measure, some people will think it's cool that you're really crazy and cruel. Other people will think you're terrible because you're cruel. Some people will think it's awesome that you're diplomatic. They're like, oh, it's so nice that you don't try to murder everyone as soon as you meet them. Other people say like, you're very weak-willed. You got to take action and be bold and decisive. Okay. So depending on the choices you make, people react differently to it. And
is it something that's kind of driven by a scale? Because in systems like that in the past, I've always worried that like you end up too middling.
No, they're all independent of each other.
Okay.
So they all build up separately. And then the ones where there's not a high frequency of options, like cruelty does not naturally come up in conversations very often.
Sure.
And so, and like you might
Unless you work with me.
Yeah. But as you might sort of think, like for the same reason, when someone does something really cruel, it tends to have a very large impact on how you view them. Okay. So similarly, those things that have a low frequency of options to do, they tend to have a bigger impact on your overall reputation. So. Okay. if you do something cruel, you can do very few cruel things and start getting a reputation as being a cruel person. Whereas benevolent, it's very common and often that you have the option to be benevolent.
Right.
So you kind of have to do more stuff along that line before people start thinking of like, oh no, he's a really nice guy. Like he really goes out of his way to be super generous.
That's cool. Okay.
So in this case, we're just asking the Glanfathan leader, like, what's the deal, guy? What's going on? And he says, well, you're trespassing places nobody's supposed to go, so unless you want your buddy to die, you better lay down your weapons.
No, there are a lot of options.
There are a lot of options. You see 3 of them you don't qualify for. We're going to try to intimidate this guy. Might can be used to intimidate people, intimidate him with physical strength. He thinks about it and he's like, no thanks. Well, so he's kind of a fanatic. He's not really intimidated by you.
And there wasn't anything that was going to indicate like percentage of success for this.
No.
I'm just kind of taking a chance and going with it.
Yeah, you just kind of think about the character. Like, this guy is a fanatic. He seems like he's really intent on screwing you guys up, and you're like, I'm going to intimidate him.
Yeah,
there are other options in there that can go different ways.
We chose poorly in this case.
So, yep, just because an option is unlocked for you because you have a high ability score doesn't mean it's going to produce a good outcome.
Okay.
So in this case, the Glanfathan leader decides to start a fight, and he does it by hitting your friend in the back with his axe. Doesn't kill him, but it does hurt him very severely.
Doesn't feel good.
No. So there he goes. He jacks up Hayden. But now Hayden is part of our party. Hayden is a rogue. They're very good at one-on-one damage.
Okay.
Not very strong. We're going to have the Barbarian Frenzy, and because he's in close range here, he can do a ton of damage to everyone in that area.
Okay.
Frenzy increases
did the rogue just get
attack,
knocked out?
What's that?
Did the rogue just get knocked out?
No, I think he's okay. I don't have my glasses on, but I think he's doing okay. Was that Kalisha knocked him down? Yeah, so Kalisha's doing her classic fighter knockdown. So you were able to overcome the attackers on the camp. The leader of the Glanfathans is not too phased though, because he's pretty sure divine justice is coming for you, and that divine justice is coming in the form of what's called a Bioek. Bioek means soul wind, and as you can see, it is a wind that literally tears the souls out of people's bodies.
Oh goodness.
Very, very dangerous, not something you want to stick around for. So the caravan master who's dying on the ground urges you to run inside for cover. So you start scrambling for the ruins, and on your way, Hayden, who's the guy you just rescued, he gets grabbed and pulled down by one of the dying Glanfathans.
Okay.
And depending on your equipment and your character class and things like that, you have different ways to try to get Hayden free from this circumstance. You can leave him, in which case he is left there to die. But you can also, in this case, choose to sacrifice one of your weapons to throw it at the Glanfathan and take him out so that Hayden can get free.
Sure.
So that does mean you actually do lose that weapon, but you do get Hayden in your party.
It's interesting too because you've set up these line art illustrations as cutscenes, but they're also cutscenes where I'm making cool decisions.
Yeah, I mean that's important.
It feels in a lot of ways like it's actually Dungeon Master explaining to me what's happening and giving me like
yeah,
choices.
So that is very much like we really like this idea of these kind of esoteric, like I do this really weird thing, or like I use a grappling hook to swing onto the whatever and blah blah blah. I want to climb up a wall. We didn't want to implement that all as systems, which is very, very expensive.
Right.
And because this is more of a traditional style game, we decided to go with these scripted sequences, because scripted interactions, because we can just describe it all through illustrations and text, and it feels really cool. So
awesome.
So all 3 of us managed to get to safety. We got inside.
I've lost a weapon.
-1 weapon, so I will have to switch out my loadout. So I'm back to sword and axe now.
I cannot get over the multi-party like inventory.
It took us a while to figure out how to do that, but
that's going to influence I think a lot of other games. That's important.
Makes it a lot easier to move stuff around.
It just in like I'm playing Divinity right now, and I'm sorting through so many like inventory options and going through different players.
Yeah. We like inventory management. We like people to have a lot of choices to make in how they manage their gear.
But it's nice to make that simple too.
Yeah, we don't want to make it we don't want you to fight with the interface.
Yes.
So one thing that Brandon is highlighting right here is that Hayden has bruised ribs.
Okay.
So that is a long-term injury. Depending on the outcome of certain conversations or scripted interactions, you can get these long-term injuries. They can be concussions, twisted ankles, bruised ribs. They're things that can go away if you rest, but they don't go away normally, and healing magic won't get rid of them either.
Okay.
So there's a lot of stuff in here like per rest abilities, your long-term health damage, also those long-term injuries that you need to rest to overcome. So in this case, Hayden is saying, hey, I'm kind of jacked up. Could we please rest for a while? He really wants to stop and rest because he doesn't feel good. Kalisha is saying, nope, sorry, we can't afford to do that. I'm afraid we're going to get attacked again. We have to get out of here as soon as possible. So at this point, you actually have a choice to make. If you actually do choose to rest, Kalisha will abandon the party.
Wow.
But at the same token, if you walk around with Harridan injured, he's walking around with a very bad injury. So
and when she abandons the party, and that's it for the game.
Yeah, she's gone. Yeah.
Wow.
So depending on the choices that you make, it can have a large impact on how things. Now, granted, I will spoil things a little bit. Kalisha and Harridan are both temporary companions for the beginning of the game.
That's fair.
But in the long term, though, there are bigger choices that you make with your companions where you have dilemmas like that as well.
Okay.
So we're looting some old chests here that were left by people that previously tried to camp in here. And so what we find are a hammer and chisel, which is a tool we can use in scripted interactions, and camping supplies. So the way that our rest system works is, in the Infinity Engine games, typically in an area you either could rest or you couldn't. And if you could rest, often there were random encounters and it encouraged save scumming and stuff that's not very fun.
Yeah.
And it's not that strategically interesting. So what we're doing in this game is we just have camping supplies. And there are some other games more recently that have done this as well, and it's a cool idea. What you do is you have a finite number of supplies that you can use. When you use them, that consumes one, and you can camp. You get all of your per rest abilities back, you remove all your long-term injuries, and you get all of your per rest abilities. Did I already say per rest abilities?
I think so.
Anyway, you get all your stuff back.
Do you also still run the risk of being attacked in the middle of the night?
No, you don't.
Okay.
But you only can carry a certain number of camping supplies at a time.
So instead of putting in a risk reward mechanic, it's a resource to manage.
It's a resource to manage.
Yeah.
It's more of a strategic thing.
Okay.
So in that way, we think it kind of encourages the players to just monitor their character's health over time, monitor their per rest abilities, and then when they're like, oh, you know what, I'm getting kind of low, I really need to refresh, they can do it. So here I found an unlucky explorer.
I imagine it also kind of keeps the game pace up higher.
Yeah, it does.
Because it was really easy in Baldur's Gate to
very,
just
very easy.
Rest and then move on to the next combat and then rest.
Yeah, we did not want to encourage rest spamming. We didn't want to encourage save spamming. We wanted to encourage people to treat their resources as things that were strategic. And we found in playtesting that that's what people do. They're like, holy crap, I can only rest twice more, and then I'm going to have to go all the way back to town before I can rest.
Right.
So people tend to treat that very seriously, which is cool. So we're looting this dead adventurer. We found this little Ingwithan relief gem, which we can use, and some more flint and tinders. We found a bunch of flint and tinders. One thing I want to comment on is when you find tools like hammers and chisels, flint and tinders, when you use them in those scripted interactions or in conversations, they're consumed. So finding more of them, it helps you use them in more scripted interactions as you go through the story.
Okay.
Here's a classic floor puzzle, Infinity Engine floor puzzle.
Yep. Looks really familiar.
Yes. So there are a number of ways that you can sort of get around this challenge. You can try to find a way around the puzzle if you want to. You can also have Head and Scout up and detect and try to disarm some of the traps, so you can see them lighting up right there.
Yeah.
He can disarm, I don't think he can disarm all of them, but he can disarm quite a few of them. But we're also going to go into the next room where we're going to interact with some other elements in the environment to try to remove the hostile tiles from the ground there. So here Kalisha is calling out that the symbols on the pillars match the symbols on the floor. Of course, if Kalisha had died before this point in time, or if she abandoned the party, she wouldn't be saying anything. You can still interact with them, but you'd have to figure it out on your own.
Okay.
So in this case, we can use our flint and tinders or our torches to actually ignite these. So each time we use the flint and tinder, it is lighting the brazier and it's removing tiles from the floor in the other room.
Okay.
So it's helping illuminate a path that we can take through that's less dangerous.
So it's kind of like a combination solution to the puzzle.
Yeah. You can. I mean, you can try to disarm some. You can light these braziers, assuming you find all the flint and tinders and torches. Because now I've run out of flint and tinders, so now I have to start using torches.
Okay.
Or, like I said, if you really just can't figure out your way through, there is another way that you can actually bypass the whole puzzle. You just have to look around and search for it. Exploration is a big part of the game.
Exploration, multiple solutions.
Yeah, we want to allow people a lot of different ways. Like you can use your class abilities, you can use just kind of exploring and interacting with the environment, and just trying to search for another way around.
Awesome.
Oof. So that's
not good.
That is a lesser black ooze.
Okay.
They have their ranged corrode attacks.
Don't want to see a greater black ooze anytime soon.
The greater black oozes are
sounds gross.
They're really bad. So yeah, the big thing with these oozes is that they have their ranged spit attacks, and they tend to call interrupts, so they'll interrupt your action.
Yeah.
Play a hit reaction.
Got it.
Oh, we resisted at that time. Oh, and by the way, one of the stats you have is resolve. Is express purpose is resisting interruptions.
Okay.
So a lot of times in combat, when characters get hit, they'll play their hit reaction, stop their action. If you have a high resolve, it makes you much more resistant.
So you'd want that for characters that are on the front line.
You want it for any character that you don't want to be interrupted. So wizards.
So wizards would need it too.
Yeah, wizards need it as well. Spellcasters need it. So
that's kind of your way of emulating the whole AD&D. Wizard has to concentrate and murmur their spells.
But it also affects melee characters as well. So if you're making a melee attack, that can be interrupted. A special ability, that can be interrupted.
Does spellcasting work in the same way where you have to memorize spells, you can only use them a certain number of times between rest periods?
It's different for different characters. So wizards have a spell book. They have, or actually it's called a grimoire technically.
Yeah.
And their different grimoires have different spells in them. And they have to switch them out to cast different spells. But that's all the preparation they really have to do is to actually have the different grimoire equipped.
Okay.
If you try to equip a different grimoire in combat, you have a cooldown where it locks out your spells for a while. So you kind of want to be careful about just haphazardly switching out your grimoire in the middle of combat. Priests and druids, they get a fixed list of spells. They don't get as many total spells as wizards, but they can cast any of them that they want.
Okay.
So that's kind of the trade-off between them. Sure. Fewer spells, but they have unlimited access to them.
Okay.
So here's another script interaction where there is a bunch of black ooze, not living black ooze, but just black goop covering this relief in the wall. We can use the water skin that we found before to wash the goop off. That reveals an eye socket that we can put the gem in that we found on the Dead Adventurer, and that reveals a secret door in the wall.
Okay.
And in that secret wall is our buddy, an ooze. But also treasure.
It's really interesting because in Baldur's Gate, I would just have some dialogue I'd click through, and I'd be seeing the same static, isometric screen. I really like the feel of cutting away.
Yeah, I mean that's really what it's about is giving a different way of telling these little narrative elements that normally
you honestly wouldn't have had to go to the extra effort of adding the illustration and stuff. Like people who played these games in the past are not used to that.
Sure, sure, and it's been very popular. When we showed them to people, they really like it. So.
It's a nice touch.
Yeah. So we found a little cloak in here. People love cloaks. Barbarians love cloaks of protection because barbarians have bad defenses.
Sure.
So there we go, our stylish cloak in action. So now that we've explored this entire wing and we've lit all the braziers, we're going to go back and try to go through the puzzle. And as you can see, those traps that had an outline before are still present, so you can still see where they are. But we've revealed a lot of the tiles on the ground, so we can actually just make our way through normally.
And you have to manually take everybody across. The pathfinding is not going to like.
You do. No, yeah, you got to manually take them across.
Okay.
Thankfully, you only have 3 characters, so it's not super time consuming or anything.
Yeah. What's the max party size going to be?
6, which is pretty much like the other games.
Yeah.
So, of course, if you accidentally trip the trap...
Oops.
So as you see there, the red completely filled up on Hayden. That took off a lot of his health, but he was able to get up because he did still have some health left.
You're just beating the crap out of Hayden.
Well, we needed someone to be the guinea pig to go into the traps.
What did the rogue do to you, man?
Some baby spiders to smack on.
Sure.
Now Kalisha moves forward. So she's drawing the spiders onto her very fast. The spiders are very quick, but there's that big mother in the back. So we're going to use the Barbarian's Wild Sprint ability. Very quickly dash up, get into the back. And now we're frenzying, so he's attacking really quickly.
To do some quick damage.
And he's doing area of effect damage. So while he was attacking the mother spider, he was also wiping out the little baby spiders.
Okay.
Where's your boy Hayden? All right.
He's in quite a lot of pain. He's not feeling it.
So we finally found our way out of the ruins, and we'll see what's on the other side. Spoilers. It's something bad.
We're home free.
Yep.
Everything's fine.
Except for this. There you go.
Is that a soul wind windmill?
Who can
You're not
say?
gonna tell me.
Who can say?
So frustrating. Yeah, I mean, it looks great. It definitely has the feel of an Infinity Engine game, which is exactly what your Kickstarter backers and other players wanted it to have.
Yeah, so hopefully people will enjoy it. You know, we really try to capture that feeling, the look and the feel of how just everything came together, how characters move and they interact and stuff like that. So
yeah, it's looking great. So when can we play this?
Winter of this year.
Okay. And
yeah, unless you're a backer,
in
which case August 18th of this year.
is when the backers get the beta, and then you're going to spend a lot of time listening to the backers and getting their feedback as well.
Yeah,
is that something, it's not something that Obsidian's used to working with necessarily, like giving that unfinished product out, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, what's the best way of separating the noise of everybody just talking about the game?
I don't know. It's just the same as always. I mean, I've worked on a lot of games where we've worked on patches and balance patches and fixes and things like that. And, you know, it's just trying to, you know, you just read through, you pass over the stuff that is not really being contributing clear feedback, and just focus on the people that are trying to be really constructive. And I guess not to be too sensitive about it. I mean, I've been talking to a lot of these fans for 15 years now. Like, I mean, and when I say that, I mean literally these fans, like people that were on the Black Isle boards for Torment, for Icewind Dale, and stuff like that. So I'm pretty used to how they talk and how they express their ideas and stuff like that. So it's just kind of just focusing on the people who are trying to be constructive and give good feedback, and then just evaluating it seriously and going like, you know what, they're right about this stuff they're completely not right about, and then just making good decisions based on that you can't make everyone happy, but you can make smart decisions that makes the game better overall for everyone.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for showing Pillars of Eternity to us.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having us.